Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
I used to be employed as a child protection worker. A report came through about a stepfather who was being abusive to his children. I was given the investigation by my team leader. When I interviewed the oldest child with the police, she had very visible physical injuries and told me exactly what had happened. I'll spare the details, but it was horrific. As the children were in his sole care, we knew that they needed to be removed immediately. We sent a team of 2 workers out to the children's school while myself and a colleague called the stepfather into the office. I lead the interview and it was horrible. He didn't even try to deny that he had hurt his stepchild, basically saying, "That's my kid, I'll do what I want and you can't stop me." When I served him with the paperwork, he absolutely lost his mind. He was swearing and screaming and said if we were outside this building right now I would kill you. We ended up running out of the interview room, pressing our emergency alarm, and I even had to make a police report about the whole thing. It got really messy. The next day we had court for the children and my manager decided I shouldn't attend due to everything that had happened the previous day. My colleague who attended told me that this man was at court and yelled several times something to the effect of "Where is that worker who took my kids?" I remember feeling a little freaked out, but it's not uncommon to hear things similar to this when you have to remove a child. It's understandable that emotions are very high. You build a bit of a resilience working in this field, and overall I mainly felt relieved that those children had been placed with an aunt and were safe. About 2 weeks later, I had to stay back late at the office on an unrelated job. It was about 9 at night when I finished and I was the only person there. I walked out the back of the building to my car. It was really dark, but when I got close I thought I saw a shadow moving at the front of my car, just for a second, and then it was gone. I was about 20 meters away at this point, but it startled me. I stood there for a second just looking at my car, wondering if I was just being paranoid. While staring into the darkness, I started hearing tiny rustling noises. Safe to say I freaked myself out and sprinted back to the building. I called my boyfriend to come and pick me up, explaining what had happened. By the time he drove up to the front doors, I had convinced myself I was being silly and asked him to drive me around to my car. He circled around and with the headlights shining on my car, I could very clearly see that all 4 of my tires had been slashed. I was an absolute mess that night and called the police immediately. I was pretty sure that this man was responsible, but as I hadn't seen him, I couldn't say for sure. I took a few days off and came back to a meeting with my manager who had put together a safety plan for me and the other staff. She organized to have a security guard escort us to our cars and said very clearly that no one was to stay in the building after hours alone. Then about a week later, a letter was delivered to the office addressed to me. Any mail that comes into the office goes through our reception staff. Our lovely receptionist opened it and it was a note that said, "You're as good as dead." The words were typed and printed. She was an older woman and burst into tears when she read it. It didn't say who had sent it, but I am convinced it was the same man. Over the next few weeks, letters kept coming, each one getting longer. They addressed me as a bit in a home record saying that I kidnap and abuse children. It was just horrible, horrible stuff. The threats in the letters were the worst. The person writing them threatened to torture, kill, find out where I live, and to burn down the entire building. To be honest, the police were less than helpful. They basically said that given the nature of our work, they couldn't conclusively say it was this man, although they had questioned him. To me, it all seemed like a pretty massive coincidence. I'd never had anything like this happen before. They did say they were taking the letters very seriously and tracking down where they'd been posted from, but I never heard anything back about that. My workplace took the threats very seriously too. All of the security was bumped up across the building and all staff completed refresher training on emergency management. One day on the way home from work, I noticed that a car was following me. At first I thought I was being paranoid, so I drove down a bunch of little streets, double backed onto the same route in a way that would make absolutely no sense. Even after all that, a dark green Camry was still paced a little way behind me. I freaked out but had already planned in my head what I was going to do in this situation. I headed straight to the police station, planning to pull right up to the front of the building and beat my horn until I had someone's attention. The second I pulled into the police station, the green Camry drove straight past and disappeared down a nearby side street. I sat there for a good 20 minutes, too scared to get out of the car in case they came back around the corner. It dawned on me that in my panic I'd forgotten to get the license plate. That upsets me to this day. I told the police what I knew, but they told me that the man didn't have any car registered in his name. This was the final straw for me. I was a nervous wreck. I was looking around constantly at work and at home home. I knew that he lived relatively close to me, so I even stopped going grocery shopping in case I ran into him. I stayed on stress leave for a month and heard from colleagues that the letters kept arriving. I was very honestly ready to quit, but then COVID happened. It really changed everything. Everyone went into lockdown and all access to the office was restricted. I started back working from home, driving a work car to and from appointments. I didn't go into the office regularly anymore, only allowed in small working groups when absolutely necessary. Over the next year, the letters slowed and eventually stopped. By the time we were allowed back in the office, there hadn't been any sign of this man for almost 7 months. About a year later, I left child protection. I don't know what happened with those children, but my hope is that they are happy and safe with their family. And as for the man who I believe stalked and threatened me for doing my job, let's not meet ever again. A few years back, when I was around 18, I entered a very rebellious phase in my life. I have always been a prodigy child, always did as I was told, never stayed out late, didn't smoke, didn't drink, scored the highest in all my classes. All my family and friends thought I was the perfect kid, but then something changed. I was on a lot of medication due to my health and I started going through depression. I started acting up like never before. I stopped going to school. I would stay in bed all day, didn't talk to anyone, and then slowly I started talking to strangers online. Initially, it was just talking to them online. I would talk to a few people until I found someone interesting, would dedicate all my time talking to them until they no longer held my interest, and then moved on to the next person. This went on for about a year. Then I eventually started meeting these people in person. Most of these meetings were sexual, and I was very reckless. I slept around with more people than I'd like to admit, and regardless of my lack of concern for own safety, I somehow never met anyone that had any evil intentions. We'd meet a couple of times, do the dirty, and that was that, until I met this one guy. I was talking to a couple of guys at that time. I wasn't in any sort of relationship, so this guy starts talking to me and asks me about my hobbies, my interests, what I do. I told him I do not smoke or drink, and he was shocked. I told him it wasn't that I'd never done it. I tried, but just felt like it wasn't my thing. We talked for a couple of weeks. I ended up talking about how I've been going through depression, and at first, he just listened. Eventually, he started telling me I should try smoking. It would help me relieve anxiety and stress, and I always turned it down, but he was relentless. After a month or so of talking online, we decided to mate. We had never had any sort of sexual conversation or anything, so we were just going to meet as friends. I was supposed to meet another guy, an acquaintance, for something I needed, so I suggested to the online chat guy that we meet briefly for lunch and then he can drop me off to the other guy's place. He agreed and we decided on where and when to go. The day we were supposed to meet, we met at a local cafe. We had brunch and then I got in his car for him to drop me off at the place I had to go. It was a good 45-minute drive, so I put on some songs and decided to relax. 5 minutes into the drive, he offered me a cigarette. I declined. He insisted and kept insisting until I gave up and agreed. I opened the box and there was only one cigarette in there. I told him it was his last one and asked if he was sure he wanted me to smoke it since he would have enjoyed it more than he said yes. I took the cigarette out and there was something odd about it. It didn't look like it was store-bought. It rather looked like it had been rolled by hand. But then again, I had never smoked enough cigarettes to be sure, so I lit it and smoked it. I couldn't smoke even half of it. It made me inexplicably nauseous, so I gave up halfway through and offered it to him. Instead of smoking it, he put it out and threw it away. I thought that was weird, but assumed he probably didn't want to smoke while driving. 30 minutes into the ride, I started feeling very sick. My whole body was shaking. I was extremely nauseous, and I could barely keep my eyes open. I kept telling him I wasn't feeling good and that maybe we should go to the nearest emergency room instead of where we were going, but he kept telling me to relax and lay back. Everything about that ride felt off. I told him to stop the car and drop me off wherever we were. He refused. All I could think of was pulling out my phone and calling for the police. When he noticed what I was doing, he immediately stopped the car and I got off. I couldn't stand, so I sat on the roadside and called the guy I was supposed to visit. He immediately drove to where I was and picked me, took me to his place where I threw up all over his living room, multiple times. For the next hour and a half, I just laid on the couch, my whole body shaking and constantly throwing up. The guy brought me water, gave me some electrolytes and kept insisting on going to the hospital, but I refused. I had no idea what I had smoked, but I was sure it wasn't just plain old cigarettes. I was scared if it had been some illegal drug, and if the hospital caught on, I would get into trouble, and I absolutely did not want my parents to find out what I had been up to. So I laid there, kept throwing up, and letting whatever that stuff was to get out of my system. All these years later, I am now married to the guy who picked me up from the roadside and helped me through an insanely embarrassing time. This story takes place about 5 days ago. I'm still shaken up over it. I'm an 18-year-old female and my parents and I packed up our stuff and made the long drive to our new home up north from our small and dinky apartment in Central Florida. I can't lie, I was very excited about this move. Attending college in the spring, finally getting to start my dream career, and so many other things I couldn't or didn't get to do in Florida. On the first night of our drive, we stopped at a hotel in what appeared to be a shady area. It was kind of scary as it was set up right outside of a closed down gas station with boards and graffiti written all over them. From my parents' experience and what I've seen on television, these aren't the types of places you want to go lurking around in. My dad, who's usually very calm and collected, was on edge the whole night since the door to our room didn't close all the way. We had to prop one of the hotel chairs against the door and use the deadbolt to have even the slightest bit of comfort. I thought it couldn't get much worse than that, but I was so wrong. The second night, we stopped at a small town in North Carolina. We had our 2 cats with us, so we had to find a hotel that was pet friendly. We came across one of those hotels and booked a room for the night. While my parents were making sure nothing shifted in the car, I sat in the passenger seat of my mom's car with my little buddy, trying to calm him down. He seemed more agitated than normal. About half an hour after pulling into the parking lot, we grabbed the cats and our essentials. Emotions were running high, so we were all on edge about getting to our new home in the next day or two, depending on the amount of sleep we got. We loaded our things into a cart and approached the hotel's side door. My mom pulled out the key card and it took a while for the door to finally unlock, but the second we heard it click, a woman started yelling at us. We all looked up and saw her frantically running towards us. Her voice was frantic. The panic in her voice still sends shivers down my spine every time I think about it. She wore a long dark blue jacket, her hair in a messy ponytail that was tucked inside her hoodie. She either looked really tired, like she hadn't slept in a year, or she had gone through something horrible. She was panting, muttering the words, "Call the police. Call the police. There's something wrong with that baby." There was no child with her, nor did we see any kids in sight. My initial thought was that maybe there was a kid near the front of the building that was seriously hurt, or there was a car accident we were too busy unloading to hear the collision. The woman kept telling us to call police, but my mom told her she didn't have her phone on her. I always carry mine on me, and me being the kind-hearted person I try to be, I offered to call for her. But the moment I pulled out my phone, my dad snatched it out of my hand. The lady then said, "It's really bad. You need to come and say." My mom told her she didn't want to see, and that we should go inside so the lady could go to the front desk and get help. At first, she was screaming, no, I don't need their help, I need your help." But my mom kept insisting that we go inside. At this point, my little buddy was whining and clawing at his pet carrier, trying to either get out or attack this lady. My boy might look like a sweet ball, but if provoked, he's a scratchy machine. The lady took one look at him and attempted to reach for him, saying, "Yeah, let's get the babies inside." The way she said that was creepy. This time she sounded like she was on drugs or had bad intentions. I scooped up my cat before she could touch him, and we led her to the front desk where she told the hotel worker the same story she told us. The hotel worker tried to calm her down, and while the lady was distracted, my parents and I walked toward the elevator and started getting inside. As I looked back at the lobby, I saw the woman staring at us, her eyes full of anger now. She then started charging at us, and before I even had a chance to react, my mom pushed me and my furry baby into the elevator, them standing in front to protect me. I could see the woman still running towards us as the elevator was closing. I remembered the small screen near the elevator in the lobby showing which floor the elevator was heading to, so to stop this crazy lady from harassing us all night, we pushed all the floor buttons and we stopped on every floor. First the second, the third, the fourth, then the fifth. After the fifth floor, we pressed the button back to our original floor and quickly piled into the room. Silence. My heart was pounding the entire time. My body started shaking at what just happened. As I got my cat out of the carrier, I heard my mom and dad talking about that lady. My dad speculated that maybe she had a mental illness or was on drugs, whereas my mom said she could have been a trafficker with the way she was trying to get us to come with her and see the supposed situation. That's when my heart broke. I try so hard to see the good in people, but at the same time, I try to keep the best distance I can. But this was the first time someone ever approached me. I was so gullible to almost believe her story. My guard had slipped. I tried to hold back my guilt and fear as best I could, but I ended up breaking down. My mom hugged me, saying everything was going to be okay. But no matter how many times she and dad kept saying that, my body continued shaking and my paranoia lasted throughout the night. Even at the slightest creak, I shot up from the bed and looked out the peephole thinking the lady had found us. Luckily, she wasn't there. That night, we all decided we were going to get up around sunrise and reach home before nightfall. No more hotel stops, no more creepy people, and no more shady areas. As we checked out the next morning, the same employee from the last night was there and we asked her what had happened after we got into the elevator. The worker told us after that, the crazy lady left in a huff, her hands clenched into fists. But then the worker revealed a detail that my mind keeps going back to. When she turned to go follow after us, she saw a syringe in the crazy lady's jean pocket. I don't know if she had already used it or was planning to use it on me and my family. It makes me wonder what the outcome would have been had my parents not been there, and if I had given the lady my phone instead of offering to call for her. Would she have sold us into trafficking? Would she have robbed us while we were injected with whatever she was on? Anyway, we made it to our new home 2 days ago, but the fear of that night still eats away at me. It goes to show that no matter how panicked and frightened someone may sound or act, you truly don't know if they're in genuine trouble or if they have bad intentions after gaining a random stranger's trust. Please be careful out there, guys. I, unfortunately, had to learn the hard way that not everyone in this world is a good person. I'm just happy to still be alive and safe. I hope I never see that crazy lady again. I'm a young guy with a nighttime job living in an area of town that has gotten pretty sketchy the past decade or so. The police are here at least once a month to sort out some violent or drug-related crime. I'm a very routine-focused person, so for the past 8 years before going to work at 1:30 in the morning, I always take my dog out for a walk around 1 in the morning. In fall of last year, I went for the routine dog walk one misty night at 1 in the morning like I usually do. I made a right turn after exiting the gate, and just as I passed the corner of my apartment building, I noticed a fuzzy shape on the ground just outside the gate of the neighboring building. I stopped in my tracks and took in what I was looking at. I determined it was just a cat laying on its side on the pavement. I thought this was odd, but since I know my dog would most certainly bark at it and wake up the entire neighborhood, I chose to turn around and take a different route for the walk than usual. For the rest of this walk, I was reflecting on that cat. There was something very off about the cat just laying relaxed on the ground in the middle of the night with no people around. Once my walk had looped me back to my gate, I decided to turn the corner again and see if the cat was still there. Sure enough, it was still there, same position and everything. Now I thought this scene was even more odd. I took my dog up to the apartment, put my work clothes on, grabbed my car keys and headed out. As I exited the elevator, the image of the relaxed cat laying outside was still in the back of my mind, perplexing me. Instead of going into the underground garage, I decided to instead go out of the main gate one last time to check if the cat was still there. I exited, turned the corner, and once again, the cat was still laying there. Since my dog wasn't with me this time, I just approached it this time to check if the cat was okay. When I got to it and looked down, I stared at it for a good long while. The cat wasn't breathing at all. It was dead, no question about it. I had my suspicions this might have been the case, so I wasn't entirely shocked, but something was still so off about it. The cat wouldn't just lay down in the middle of a paved sidewalk to die of natural causes. I thought. There was no noticeable blood on or around it, so I began thinking the cat might have jumped from one of the balconies. Just as that thought hit me, a raspy voice spoke to me from above. "Yeah, there she is," the voice said in a very matter-of-fact type of tone. I got spooked and quickly glanced up through the mist. I saw a middle-aged woman on the 5th floor balcony leaning over the railing, looking down on me with a lit cigarette in her hand. When our eyes met, a cold shiver shot through the top of my scalp all the way down to my toes in an instant. I may have misinterpreted her facial expression due to the fog, but I could swear she was smiling when our eyes met. Without responding, I immediately turned and quickly walked over to my gate. As I walked, I could hear her laughing. I practically sprinted to my car in the garage. Once I sat down inside, I considered whether I should call the police or not, as every aspect of what I had just witnessed gave me the impression that this neighbor of mine had killed the cat. I dialed the number but decided not to, as they might want me to stick around for questioning, which might get me late to work. So I went on with my night as usual, doing my best to forget about the incident for now. When I got home later, the cat wasn't there anymore. About a week later, I walked past a neighbor living in the same building as me. We had some usual neighborly small talk, but she interrupted herself to ask me whether I heard about what happened in the other building last week. I said I didn't. She told me that a woman on the 5th floor had thrown her cat down from the balcony in a rage because it peed on the living room carpet. The cat had apparently not died immediately, but all its legs were broken from the initial impact with the concrete pavement. Police were called around 5 in the morning when another dog walker saw the cat. The woman had still been out on the balcony by this point, talking to the guy while he called the police. I believe the woman's other cats were taken away from her and she was fined a few $1,000s. She still lives there and I sometimes see her leaning on the balcony railing when I'm walking my dog. I've never interacted with her after that and I sincerely hope she never speaks to me again. I have this friend, for the sake of the story I'll just call him Ryan, who I believe has been stalking me for the past 2 weeks if not longer. I'll give some background information then get into the problem I'm in. Thanks in advance for any advice and help. We met back in 2014 in high school. He was always a quiet but nice and easygoing guy. We grew very close and I saw him as a brother. He didn't have a very smooth childhood. He saw his parents argue a lot, often for years. His mom even cheated on his dad and he saw the effect it had on him and the whole family. But you wouldn't suspect anything out of the ordinary ordinary just meeting him at first. Around 2016, he started to become a bit paranoid and would seem a bit pessimistic at times. He never had many friends, neither did I for that matter. We had 2 other friends together that we saw often, and we were the only ones he trusted. I saw him have this strange panic attack where he ran out of a restaurant we were at and he ran to a nearby park and yelled at people. I called his dad to come get him and he got him in the car and gave him a pill. Apparently this has been the second time this happened recently then. Fast forward to June 2021. In between that last episode / attack to now, Ryan seemed normal as could be, but I noticed he was a bit off and has been since then. He met a girl in college months before that he says he fell madly in love with, but she rejected him when he asked her on a date and blocked him on everything right after graduation. It took a massive toll on his emotional and mental state. He had another episode where he ran outside his house and actually provoked someone and they punched him in self-defense, and then his parents took him to the hospital during that summer and was officially diagnosed with schizophrenia. So from late 2021 until now, I've noticed he's quieter, still cracks jokes, and can have a decent conversation with them and still seems like a nice guy. But there's some stuff recently that I truly think is alarming, and this is why I'm making this post. So I'll cut to the chase. For the last 6 weeks, we've hung out 3 times. This was actually after a hiatus where we didn't see each other since February this year because I started working more hours and went to night shift. Each of those 3 hangouts, I've noticed he looks at me in a really strange way, like he's horny and imagining me naked or imagining himself hurting me. He also mentions how he's still in love with that girl from school but proceeds to call her names and wants to kill her right after. He has said this numerous times and even mentions going to the elementary school she goes to. He sent me a picture of that school on Google Maps with arrows pointed at it and firework emojis last week. He also admitted to having parked outside her home and sitting there for hours about 5 times back in 2021. For the past week, he has been insisting on hanging out several times a day, and when I was at Chili's with my parents on site, he sent me a message saying Chili's. He's able to see me since I'm on the Snap map on Snapchat since I use the app often to talk to other friends. When I went to the mall right after he said you're going to the mall again, you were there yesterday, which is true. I went to the mall twice, once with mom and then with both my parents the day later to get some stuff since one of our favorite stores was closing, so we wanted to check out good deals. On the drive home that day, he messaged me saying you didn't work today, we should have hung out. I replied maybe Wednesday. So the day after, on Sunday, he again insisted on seeing me, but I went to go play soccer instead with other friends and then went to go do laundry afterwards, and when I was at the laundromat he sent me a soccer ball emoji and a laundry emoji indicating he saw me on the Snap map. Here's the thing, he keeps mentioning where I am and it's always within 10 minutes of me being on my phone. He's actually done this for the last 2 years, but never this frequently. It used to be like twice a month and I brushed it off, but now I'm noticing something actually concerning. He has also been calling me boyfriend and sending heart emojis the past week, and when I told him I might see him this week, he said you think I can wait that long to see my boyfriend. This past Sunday I didn't reply to him for 4 hours and he kept asking if I'm mad and then said he wants me to reply no longer than a minute after he texts me each time. I have the feeling he's just constantly on his phone looking for when I'm active on social media, and I really don't know why. He also admitted to me a month ago that he makes fake profiles to be able to gain access to that one girl's Instagram and look at her pictures, and he says he jacks off to them. All of this is concerning. He currently doesn't have a job and hasn't had one for the last 2 years. I'm the only friend he sees and talks to, and I feel he's developed a compulsion or fixation or dependence or a mix of all 3 on me. And as I mentioned, he has said he wants to kill the girl that used to be in his class, and he knows where she lives and he knows where she works. I have not mentioned my thoughts on this to him again out of fear. He currently takes medication daily and he said he's been seeing a new therapist for just a month now, but I don't know if any of those are even working. I am asking for any advice on how to approach this and what to do. My concern is that if I tell anyone like the police or the girl, he will find out and retaliate by hurting me or my family as he knows where I live. Any help is appreciated. This happened about 20 years ago. I was 9 years old at the time, but my parents have also told me their side of the story on a bunch of different occasions, so that should help. My parents are both biologists. They met at work, and from there it's history. The place where they worked at the time was a government building dedicated to biology research used in government projects turned towards the public, meaning they were the ones studying the environment and making environmental protection laws around their studies. This being a massive, old government building, it always had a security guard present day and night. night. During the day, these security guards would mostly just stay at reception and greet people, but at night they would go do their rounds and make sure there were no intruders because of all the science equipment and computers kept in the building. One of these guards is the let's not meet guy. Initially, he seemed like the nicest person. He was really nice to me, and frankly, all the memories I have from him before this were really nice. He would greet me and talk to me in the nicest way every time my parents brought me to work. He would make me paper planes, which he was surprisingly good at, and throw them around with me, and he would stay with me at reception in the days my parents had to work into the night. Obviously, for me, that would get really boring really fast, so he'd keep me company and entertain me. Mostly we would talk, play with the paper planes, and watch television. It all seemed nice enough for my parents to trust him with me, which was probably their biggest mistake. One night, my parents had to work even later than usual. I think it was around 10 at night and they were still at it, so this guy, who was on the night shift, decided to take me around the building with him to do his rounds. We started on the top floor, checking all the rooms and the exterior part on the roof. Every room was so dark that I'd always stay a little behind and wait for him to turn on the lights. Then we stepped down to the second floor where my parents' office and labs were. We checked the opposite side of the building, going into labs with massive extractors, microscopes, and every kind of science equipment you might think of. We walked down the stairs to the first floor where most of the administration rooms were. I still remember seeing some maps on the walls and embalmed fish everywhere serving as decorations. First floor was all clear, so it was time to check the 2 basement levels. I thought it would have made sense to check the labs on the right side first, as the left side had a flight of stairs at the end leading up to where my parents were, but for some reason he decided we'd go check that side first. We checked all the labs, but I noticed his pace was accelerating and he was starting to look and sound happier. Excited even. Once again, we checked all the labs, all the quarters from one end to the other, turning the lights on ahead of us and turning them off behind us when we left. When we got to the last area, he turned all the lights on and we went inside. There were 3 separate offices on each side of the lab, and on the first one, he hurried towards the printer, opened it up, took out 2 pieces of paper, and made 2 quick paper planes. That's when everything changed. He picked up one of the planes, went outside of the office, and threw it towards the end of the room. Then he told me the one he just threw was mine and that we could throw them around in there. I ran to the other side of the room to pick my plane up, excited to play with it, and suddenly the lights went off. When I turned around to check what was happening, I saw him getting out of the lab, turning the lights off and locking the door. I ran to the door, punched it and kicked it while screaming for him to open, panic taking over me because of how scared I was of being in the dark at the time. Through the glass on the door, I could see him scurrying away in the corridors, turning the lights off as he went and disappearing after turning a corner. I'm pretty sure that everything I felt and every shadow and creepy monster I saw in there while waiting was part of my imagination because of how scared I was. I balled up against a corner and could see shadows moving around me in the dark. I could only cry, lost, without knowing what was happening and why he was doing that. My parents finished work eventually, and when they did, they packed up their things and made their way to the lobby to pick me up and go home. When they got there, the security guard was at reception, but I was nowhere to be found. They panicked, of course, must have shouted 100 different cuss words at the guy, and I'm not sure how my dad didn't murder him right then and there, but when they first asked the guy where I was and what he had done with me, he simply said that he had gone to do the rounds with me and I must have gotten lost somewhere. This is a building that would take you about an hour and a half to check from top to bottom, even if you're rushing, so must have gotten lost somewhere is not exactly helpful. They looked for hours without finding me. It was only when I saw a light far at the end of the corridors leading to the lab I was in that I got the courage to stand up, rush towards the door and start punching it as hard as I could. They finally found me there and made the guard unlock the door to get me out. I don't really remember sleeping that night, and if I did, it must have been out of exhaustion, but I know I made my mom stay in the bedroom with me the entire night. Of course, my parents made a complaint against the guard, and when they did and the guy started being investigated, he was fired and arrested, not because of locking me away where he probably hoped no one would find me, but because he had been partnering up with other criminals to steal computers and equipment from the building to sell in some shady market along with the information in the hard drives and make money off it. By then, he had stolen a lot of old computers without anyone realizing, and who knows what his plans were for me that night. I'm not convinced that locking a crying child in the middle of the darkness, hidden away in some room is exactly the most normal behavior if you're not trying to hide them and come get them later when everyone has left and sell them as part of your product. Luckily, he never had the chance to do that, and I really hope he never got to do it to any other kid. This is about weird encounters I've had with a music teacher when I was a kid. I, a 20-year-old female, took orchestra classes when I was in middle school. Now, it's important to mention that I was an incredibly quiet and shy kid back then and had trouble with confrontation. When I was in 6th grade, our first orchestra teacher left the position and they rehired our new teacher. Our new teacher, I'll call him Mr. Smith, was generally disliked by everyone. He was in his 50s to early 60s, and to an 11-year-old, very tall. He was already imposing because of this, but what made it worse was how he treated his female students. One day in class, we were all struggling to play a song correctly. Mr. Smith became frustrated and didn't think any of us understood the beat of the song. He looked around the class, saying he needed a volunteer. Everyone became silent, including me, but I had the misfortune of locking eyes with him. He then called my name and waved me up to the front of the room. What happened next was not something anyone was expecting. I picked up my instrument to take up front with me, and he said, "No, leave your instrument. Just you." I was very confused, but did as he said. I walked up to his side, and he instructed me to stand in front of him. At this point, the class was beginning to snicker, and I was just very uncomfortable. "Move closer." I took a small step towards him, and at this point I was too scared to look at his face. All I could see was his buttoned shirt in front of me. He made me walk closer until I was inches from him. Then, he moved my arm up and put my hand in his. He proceeded to make me slow dance with him for what felt like forever as he counted the beat. I let go of his hand at one point and tried walking back to my seat, but he grabbed my arm and pulled me back, saying not yet. After this was over and I went on to my other classes, I learned that in each period of the day, he had chosen a female student to dance with him, regardless if the class was struggling to understand the beat. Unfortunately, this was not the end of what felt like I wanted attention from him. He would somehow find me in the hallways and would try to have talks with me about anything, even though I mostly kept to myself and didn't cause trouble in class. It got to a point that my friends understood how I felt and knew to say something to me when they saw him. And every time, without fail, he always managed to put his hands on my shoulders when he talked to me, even if I was already backed against a wall. He wouldn't let me leave, and I was too scared to say anything. He could find me in a crowd easily. He didn't do anything to my knowledge that was punishable, but to me, something always felt off about him. So to my creepy music teacher, let's not meet again. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.